Hi, the SI meteorologist Paul Dorian here on Wednesday, February 20th. I thought we'd take a look at the latest global sea ice situation, some interesting things going on. Sea ice is an important variable to monitor with respect to global climate, and it does represent about 7 or 8% of the Earth's surface. It generally has a bright surface, so it reflects sunlight back into space, which of course contributes to why it's so cold around the polar regions where all the sea ice in the world exists right now, the North and South Pole. We'll take a look at what's going on at both poles over the next few minutes. Periodically we monitor what's going on in the sun, which is of course the most important driver of all weather and climate, and sea ice is another factor to monitor here at the siweather.com. So we'll do that periodically as well. Let's first start off by looking at the very latest sea surface temperature anomaly chart for all the oceans around the world, because it certainly plays a role in what's going on with respect to sea ice in the polar regions. First of all, way down here in the south, notice a lot of below normal sea surface temperatures surrounding Antarctica. This is all just on the outskirts of Antarctica. In fact, the white here indicates sea ice. You can see some sea ice over here, and this is all, the black here is the continent of Antarctica, and lots of below normal temperatures. And indeed, the sea ice right now in the southern hemisphere is above normal. Now meanwhile, the Atlantic Ocean shows lots of above normal sea surface temperatures, especially the northern half of the Atlantic Ocean. And the Atlantic has slipped into kind of a warm phase back in the middle 90s, and the sea ice seems to be quite well correlated with the what we call the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation. Once that slipped into a warm phase back in the mid-90s, that's when the Arctic sea ice, or the northern hemisphere sea ice, seemed to take a turn to the negative or below normal, and that's where we stand right now. But the combination of the two, what's going on in the northern hemisphere and what's going on in the southern hemisphere, is right around normal, and we'll point that out over the next few minutes. Meanwhile, Pacific Ocean continues to show a cold phase of the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, or PDO, typical horseshoe-shaped, colder than normal temperatures here across the Pacific. While the Pacific is in a cold phase, the Atlantic is in a warm phase. Well, here's a sea ice anomaly chart from the University of Illinois. If you Google cryosphere, you get these plots, are very nice plots. They monitor the southern hemisphere sea ice as well as the northern hemisphere, and then put it together for a global pattern here. And we'll take a look first at the southern hemisphere. It's above normal right now in terms of the sea ice relative to the period of 1979 to 2008. This is despite the fact that right now it's the middle of the summer down there. Here in the northern hemisphere, we're in the middle or latter part of the winter, but they're holding their own here at above normal levels with respect to sea ice in the southern hemisphere. Now let's take a look at the northern hemisphere. And here is the sea ice anomaly chart for the northern hemisphere. Below normal right now, even though it has been actually creeping up closer to normal here, but right now it's below normal here. Now one other thing, interesting thing I want to point out here, notice around 1995 or so, that's when the sea ice anomaly started taking a downward turn here. And we'll see in a moment here that this is about the same time as the Atlantic slipped into a warm phase. The Atlantic temperatures are tracked by an oscillation index called the Atlantic Multi-Decadal Oscillation, AMO, and indeed we'll see in a moment here that that kind of flipped into the positive territory for the AMO, in other words, warmer than normal temperatures in the Atlantic. At the same time, it's correlated pretty well with what's going on in the northern hemisphere in terms of sea ice. These oceanic oscillation indexes or oceanic patterns in the Pacific and the Atlantic can last for a couple of decades, 2 or 3 decades, but I suspect when the AMO slips back into neutral or negative phase, in other words, when the Atlantic cools off again, the sea ice should return to normal here in the Arctic. And here is, in fact, a plot of the annual AMO, Atlantic Multi-Decadal Oscillation. And notice here, right around 1995, 1996 or so, that's when it became positive. The Atlantic Ocean moved into a warm phase, and that appears to certainly be contributing to the below normal sea ice in the northern hemisphere. In other words, the northern Atlantic, warmer than normal sea surface temperatures are having an influence on the sea ice surrounding up in the northern hemisphere. The interesting part about the poles is the southern hemisphere, the South Pole, of course, is a landmass, Antarctica, surrounded by water, whereas the North Pole is the Arctic Ocean surrounded by land. So a couple, different geographical factors going on here with respect to the poles. But again, there seems to be quite a decent correlation here between this Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation and what's going on with respect to the sea ice up in the northern hemisphere. Let's now take a look at the global impact of all of this. Well, here's a plot of the global sea ice, and notice right now it's just about normal here. In fact, it's just touching or maybe even a tad above the neutral line or the normal line here, represented by the 0. So the combination of the above normal in the southern hemisphere and the below normal in the northern hemisphere are yielding pretty close to normal in terms of global sea ice right now. And this chart, again, is produced at the University of Illinois Cryosphere Center. If you just Google University of Illinois Cryosphere, you'll get these sea ice charts. So we'll continue to monitor this over the years to come here at the SIweather.com. That's it for now. I'm the SI meteorologist, Paul Dorian.